Okay, it's 2 minutes past the hour now. I think other people can still join if they come a bit late. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want to appear on screen, please do turn off your cameras. And also for a bit of housekeeping, please do mute yourself if you are not the one speaking. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us to our seminar on fieldwork safety. We have a really exciting speaker in Sophie Burke. I'm really happy she agreed to do this for us. This training seminar is something that is Pete, the Peatland Early Career Researcher Action Team, are organizing together with the Global Peatlands Initiative, the York Environmental Sustainability Institute, and CPEAT. And just a quick introduction for those who don't know me. My name is Martina Schleipfer. I work as a research assistant at the Peatland Science Center at the University of Applied Sciences Weihenstephan-Triesdorf. That's near Munich in Germany. And together with Nicole Sanderson, who is a new assistant professor at the Université de Québec, Montréal. That's why she can't be here today, because she's teaching. We are both volunteering for Pete, and the two of us have been involved in organizing these seminars. Pete is a global network who aims to connect and support peatland early career researchers. And that's, for example, through our Peat Needs funding scheme that offers micro grants to cover costs for peatland early career researchers that they might not get funding for elsewhere. And yeah, we also have a newsletter, a website that contains a lot of different information that might be useful to peatland early career researchers or peatland researchers in general. Then about Sophie Burke, our speaker today. Sophie received her PhD from the Trace Gas Biogeochemistry Lab at the University of New Hampshire, and she currently is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of New Hampshire. She works in the Satellite Airborne Drone Remote Sensing Lab of the Earth Systems Research Center. And she is the Fieldwork Safety Coordinator for the University of New Hampshire. Her research interests focus on the use of drone imagery in subarctic peatlands to monitor the effects of climate change and permafrost thaw on vegetation patterns. And her current research is based in northern Sweden, and she researches the impacts of these changes on greenhouse gas emissions as well. Oops, sorry. I forgot to change to that slide, so now you also have an idea of what Nicole looks like, since you can see Sophie and me in person. So back to Sophie. She has extensive fieldwork research in subarctic, boreal, and subtropical peatlands, and she's passionate about how intentional fieldwork safety preparation can promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the geosciences. Before I hand over to Sophie, a very quick last housekeeping thing. If you have questions, please do type them into the chat box throughout. If you want to ask your question anonymously, you can use a direct message to me. And there will also be an option to type in your question in a Mentimeter link that will be shared in a few minutes. Okay, Sophie, over to you.
All right, thanks, Martina. Thank you for having me here today. So I will start by sharing some slides. Okay, so I first wanted to start my talk off by acknowledging the land in which I live and work. So as a member of the University of New Hampshire community and as a resident of the state of New Hampshire. I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded homelands of the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples. And here on the screen is UNH's Land, Water, and Life acknowledgement. And so I'm just going to leave that up for a few moments. Okay, thank you. All right, so so who am I? So I have had the privilege to travel to many places for fieldwork and conferences, and here are some pictures of me at various places that I have visited. As Martina had mentioned, I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of New Hampshire. A huge project that I work on that you will sort of hear me mention throughout this presentation is the eMERGE project, the eMERGE Institute. eMERGE stands for the Emergent Ecosystem Response to Climate Change. It's an NSF funded institute, Biology Integration Institute, that is made up of a transdisciplinary group of researchers from across the globe. And a major part of this work is field work in northern Sweden, some of which I had participated in during my PhD. And so, as well as doing some, particularly some remote sensing fieldwork for that project, I've also been involved in the development of fieldwork safety policies for eMERGE. And you'll hear me mention a little bit more about that later. Also, another recent aspect of my work has been helping to develop a comprehensive research fieldwork safety program for researchers at the University of New Hampshire. This has started as a grassroots effort of colleagues of mine and I coming together to draft a template for researchers to use to plan their fieldwork. And this is now expanded into the development of a research fieldwork safety program at UNH that's housed in our environmental health and safety department. And I'm also working collaboratively with a research institute on campus called the Prevention Innovations Research Center on developing trainings for researchers centering around interpersonal violence prevention. And my colleague who's here today, Jane Stapleton, is one of the co-founders of PERC and is part of this work in particular is our Fieldwork Safety Training Development Director. And so part of our goal in this program development is developing safety templates for researchers to plan their fieldwork, and also we're working to establish a fieldwork safety committee made up of researchers and other interested parties on campus to develop a system of peer review of these safety templates. So I'd also like to share this slide here at the beginning. This is some suggested group norms that I have for this training. This is a slide that's been modified from some of the meetings I've been a part of, many virtual meetings as well with my work with eMERGE. So I'd like to suggest these as our group norms for today, centering around respect, patience, and communication. And so as had been mentioned a little bit by Martina, it'd be great if these group norms can also transfer over as well into the breakout rooms that we have set up. So calling for people to be fully present as best to their ability, as well as participating to the best of your ability. Feel free to ask for clarification or submit any questions into the chat. And also, please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking to limit any feedback during the presentation. Okay, and so next I'd like to find out a little bit more about you, about the participants in this training. So I have some questions set up through a Mentimeter poll. So if you haven't used Mentimeter before, you can go to menti.com on your mobile device or on your computer and type in the code 5815692, and it will bring up some questions, and I will show those on my screen here. Okay, great. I see some people are already in there already. So this first question is, what career stage are you at? And also for those who have who are selecting other, if you would like to put in the chat what your career stage or position is, if you'd like to share that, please feel free. Just give it another minute or so for people to respond. Great, so we've got a mix, some graduate students, postdocs, research scientists, and a good portion of the other category. Yay, great, mixing it up. Okay, all right, I'm let me give it maybe another couple seconds. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the next question. The next question is, where is your fieldwork primarily located? Close to campus, or your, say, your home work base, work home base, or far from campus, meaning your work requires overnight stays? Okay, we've got good proportion of those close to campus, and then a little bit more who are traveling farther afield. Cool, great. It's nice that we have a good mix and it's not just one or the other. This is great. Okay, next question. So how much fieldwork experience have you had? Do you have a lot, or some, or a little, or not so much yet? Great, we're kind of showing across the board a bit, which is nice. Lots of people have lots of experience. Cool. Oh, nice. Every section gets an answer. That's great. So we have a good, again, a good mix of all experience levels. This is great. Okay, moving on. So did of those of you who answered that you have field experience, did your previous field experiences have safety plans? Yes, I helped write it. Yes, but it was written by someone else. Or no, we didn't have a plan. Okay, answers are rolling in. Okay, nice. So a good, a larger proportion of you have said yes, and you helped write those safety plans. That's really great to hear. Some of you said yes, that there was a safety plan, but it was written by someone else. And then in between those two, 7 of you have said no, we didn't have a plan. So again, a mix. And this last question for this section, so of those previous fieldwork experiences that had safety plans that you were aware of, did you feel that your psychological safety was taken into consideration? And when I'm talking about psychological safety here, I'm referring to one definition that I have here is the ability to share ideas, take risks, and solicit feedback without fear of repercussion. So kind of having an environment where you feel like you can you know, bring up concerns or share potentially negative experiences with those that are also involved in the fieldwork. That's what I mean by psychological safety. Okay, so as the questions come rolling in, we have some that have said yes, definitely their psychological safety was taken into consideration. The majority so far have said no, the focus was on physical safety. And then some of you are not quite sure whether that plan considered that. Okay. Great. Okay. So thank you for your responses. This is really helpful for me. And so now I'm going to go back into. I'm going to transition back into my presentation. Okay. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of context for why safety considerations are important in scholarly activities, the research that we do, fieldwork. And so there's a lot of research out there in various publications. Some of them that I bring up here describe the benefits of having diverse research groups. And as I said, they come from all different, this research shows up in all different types of publication. We have the Harvard Business Review, Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology, and yet, we have seen that we know that there is qualitatively and quantitatively a problem with diversity in this area. And so you can see that by some of these articles here that I'm calling out. And some of you may also remember this article that came out in BuzzFeed in 2021 that called out serious issues with a Smithsonian field station. And that was, yeah, a pretty shocking article to many, although not a surprise also to many. We are moving in the right direction. There are now major organizations are standing up against harassment with explicit statements in their codes of conduct. We also have new requirements for funders for safety plans. These particular examples are US based with the National Institute of Health, as well as the National Science Foundation, which is a huge funding agency in the United States, has come out explicitly with requirements for proposals to have safe and inclusive working environments for off-campus or off-site research. So that's an acknowledgement. They are requiring an acknowledgement that a plan exists for any proposal that includes fieldwork. And so what I hope to kind of share with you today is, the importance of safety considerations at all levels. We have the individual, the team, and the research. And yet we know that, research integrity can be called into question if the safety of the individual or the team was compromised in the pursuit of the data collection. And I hope this goes without saying is that no data is worth compromising the safety of the individual. And so now I'd like to transition into our first breakout room. Here in this breakout room, we're going to have you go into small groups, and we'll be sharing a link to a Jamboard where each Jamboard slide is for a particular breakout room. And you can navigate to that slide, whichever lines up with the number of your breakout room. And the Jamboard is split up into challenges and solutions. The top of the Jamboard can be where you put particular challenges, concerns, or considerations for your particular fieldwork. And so we'll take about 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back together and hear from one or two breakout rooms.
So yeah, anything changed?
Okay, so I think we're just waiting for a few people to come back. Okay, So I'll get started. So it would be great before we move on if I could hear from maybe one or two breakout rooms that would like to share a challenge that they discussed. And it looked like from the Jamboard that there was a lot of challenges people have discussed. So is there a breakout room that would like to share? You can either raise your hand and unmute yourself and share, or if you prefer, you can put it in the chat. Either is fine.
I guess I can share something.
Yeah, thanks, Martina. That'd be awesome. Yeah, awesome, Martina.
I'm not sure how much we discussed, but we were very busy typing in the Jamboard. And yeah, I think for a lot of the people in my breakout room, it was working in remote locations where people are often by themselves. And also dealing with challenging weather conditions potentially. There was one comment on also drinking culture at a field site and camps. And I think for me personally, I've not done a lot of fieldwork in remote locations, but for us it's very, very long field days because for CO2 flux measurements, we are often out for 14 hours. And then we have to drive to and from the field site in addition to that. So it's really a challenge with driving when you're really exhausted and tired. And also our group, we have a lot of international students doing internships, and sometimes those students might not be familiar with hazards that are an issue here in Germany or in the field.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, so these are great examples, you know, this mainly people sort of not knowing what to expect, right? Before they go. And that's a lot of what I'll be talking about next. So I think that's a great segue, Martina. So I'm going to dive right in. So one of the big things that you're going to hear me talk about a lot is the importance of preparation. And how it's a huge part of this sort of feedback loop for fieldwork preparation. So you have the work that you do before you leave, the planning, the preparations, the group discussions, and that then all that work then funnels into the during your trip, what happens during your trip. Then you also have the time when you return, where you have an opportunity for group reflection, to talk about what worked well, what to do differently. And all of that work that you do when you return can then go straight into the preparation that you do before you leave on your next trip. And so that's what I mean by it being a feedback loop. The preparation you do before you leave affects the experience during your trip, which is going to affect what happens after your trip, and so on. And part of what we do in Emerge, especially as part of our preparation, is we review this Emerge Field Safety and Logistics Handbook. And so a link to this is available online. And there's a link to this that can be shared in the chat. I think Jane or Martina will share that there. And so I'm going to bring, I'm going to sort of take the framework that we use in Emerge to kind of show you an example of how this preparation can be done. And so one of the main steps you can do before to prepare for your trip is you can have pre-departure meetings, which ideally will occur well before departure and have full participation from all travelers and project leads. And during these meetings, you can discuss all aspects of the project. So the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. And some examples of these, is destination information. The why, can be things like trip goals and how they are related to overall project goals. And for the how, you can discuss things like developing a community agreement, as well as conducting an inclusive risk assessment. And I'm going to talk more specifically about those two things in a little bit. And from these pre-departure meetings, you can also have productive outputs like the creation of field gear lists, and also the discussion about go, no-go criteria. So what criteria are you going to use to decide to go into the field or not go into the field for any particular reason? And this information too, is discussed in detail with all members of the team. And this allows for modifications to be made based on the makeup of the group. People can request more resources and details and things like that. So they can be really, these conversations, especially if they happen before you go, can be really fruitful for the whole team. And this figure here is kind of a schematic showing all of the things that we in Emerge discuss before we go. And it's essentially the contents of that handbook that I showed. And, as I had mentioned, we allow for space during these pre-departure meetings for people to ask questions. And this is especially important for people who've never been to this field site before. The field site that we visit is in northern Sweden. And it's, it can be a place that people have never been to before. We've had people who, come on our team who've never flown overseas before. And so there's all these sort of nuanced aspects of this experience that can be really novel for people. So when you're talking about field site information, being as detailed as possible can really make a big difference for people, especially if they've never been to a site before. And this can be anything from where's the nearest hospital, what expected weather is like. We'd heard earlier that weather can be a big challenge for people, and this is especially important when considering preparing people for the types of gear that they're going to need in order to be ready for those varying weather conditions. And this sort of information too can also be really important to communicate to people who've never been to a site before, but it can also be the information that people who've been to a site a lot can find not maybe as important to share. It can be kind of difficult if you've been to a site before to sort of remember what are those things that you would want to know if you've never been to this site before. Another important aspect of where you're going is also just, whose land are you working in? This provides a lot of important context for your work. And it is also provides important details, around cultural differences that you might run into. So as I'd mentioned, for Emerge work, the field work that we do is conducted in Sweden. And so as a part of our pre-departure checklist, which is a component of our handbook, where we have all the members of the field team go through this checklist before they leave, we have some readings and website exploration that we require that describe cultural differences between the US and Sweden, for example. And as well, we have some resources on the Sami people, which are the people that reside in northern Scandinavia, and Sapmi, which is the name of their land where the field site that we work in resides within. So that is also important for putting the site into context for us. And some other examples, for For other resources, one that may be more broadly applicable to folks is the nativeland.ca website, where you can see where locations overlap with Indigenous lands. Another important thing that I want to bring up is field gear acquisition. So this is field gear lists are going to be very particular to a certain field work, but I also wanted to bring up that field gear can be a real barrier for people. A lot of it is very exorbitant in cost, and it can be a real issue. This particular article is really good at explaining that. There are also, unfortunately, gender differences between cost of items, which is a problem. And so I would encourage you that if you feel that you need a piece of gear in order to be successful in your field work, I'd encourage you to discuss that with your supervisor or program director to see if a piece of gear can be borrowed, or if funds from the project could be allocated to buying that gear. Because having the right gear can really mean the difference between having a positive experience or a negative experience. Another thing to discuss before you go is the development of a community agreement. This is also known as a code of conduct. This is a document that essentially, details how you and your group plan to conduct yourself during your field work. And this can be really helpful for setting expectations for people around group norms. So things like conflict resolution strategies, and also how you plan to communicate with each other during the field work. Also, how you plan to communicate with those who are not on the trip. Providing time for you to talk with loved ones or your community at home, talking with project leads that may not be in the field with you, those sort of expectations as well. And this can be really helpful for people to sort of set, as I said, to set those expectations, especially when they're already going into a potentially a very unfamiliar environment. And so within that, a great example I like to bring up is, during field work, you're going to be in sort of very unfamiliar, but also intensive environments. You can be spending a lot of time with people, and it can be difficult to kind of know when to step away and take your own alone time. So here is an example of me and my friends Frankie and Clarice taking some alone time during some field work that we did in northern Canada. And so that's something that you can put in explicitly in your community agreement. You can include statements that say, we encourage field team members to take time for themselves at the end of every field day. Just acknowledging that people can maybe need time to decompress on their own. Another thing to talk about is inclusive risk assessments. So these are a way to discuss hazards and mitigation strategies that you might encounter. And risk assessments are often used to discuss hazards, but they often can focus primarily just on physical hazards, and they can also be sort of focused on the overly obvious ones. And so it's important to consider what are potential hazards that you yourself may not encounter based on your identity or specific aspects of your life, but could be potentially experienced by others on the team. And so sort of a framework that we use for this in Emerge is we also try to take equal consideration into potential negative physical effects of a particular hazard, as well as negative psychological effects. So again, not putting all of the stock in negative physical effects of a particular hazard, but also trying to bring equal weight to negative psychological effects. I think that's really important as well, to sort of bring equal weight to those things. Some example categories that you can include in your risk assessment can be, interpersonal hazards, natural hazards, infrastructure hazards. And again, an example of this is in the eMERGE handbook. Another couple things just briefly that I wanted to mention, things that I mentioned earlier is like go, no go criteria. These are things that you want to discuss with your team, that, kind of give that criteria for how are you going to decide whether or not you're going to go into the field or not. These can be based on, what things you're planning on doing during your field work, weather, and then also though, consider, how your field team is feeling overall. The weather might be great, but everyone might be totally exhausted based on, how hard you've been working already. And you're going to want to consider, even if, the weather is great, is it still worth it for us to go out if everyone is exhausted, maybe not at their best? You try to weigh those pros and cons of going out if everyone is not at 100%. And then you're going to want to make sure everyone in the field team is aware of this criteria and are able to sort of address their concerns if they have any concerns about going out into the field in a particular day. And also you're going to want to consider what happens if weather or circumstances suddenly change during the field day. What actions is the team going to take? I also wanted to bring up briefly to access to bathrooms. This is something, again, that, someone who's had a lot of experience at a particular field site might not consider as something important to discuss with members who haven't been to that site before, but it's still really important to bring up. And it's really good to just make sure, again, that people know what they're getting into, because that, again, can just bring a lot of comfort, I think, to people who've never been to a particular place before. And for example, particularly around bathroom access, you don't want anyone on your team to reduce their water intake, for example, because they're worried about an access to private bathrooms. And if you are one of those people, just encourage your team to bring that up with their team leader. They don't have to say it in front of the whole team, but just you want to make sure that someone is aware of that. And then just again, it's peeing outside in nature can be weird sometimes, but there are things out there that can help make it a little bit easier. Like, for example, if for those who don't pee standing up, pee cloths can be a real game changer for feeling more comfortable using the bathroom outside. I also just have this pro tip here for if you need to pack in and out your bathroom trash, you can take a Ziploc bag, cover it in duct tape, and put a little aspirin, crush a little aspirin in it to manage the odor, or foot powder, things like that. And that can be really handy to just take out in the field with you and then toss it away. That's a tip I got sort of offhand from someone that I've never forgotten. So I like to just stick it in any opportunity I have in these kinds of contexts. And so now, wow, finally, I'm now going to talk about what happens during your trip, right? So now we've done all of that conversation, all of that preparation. Now you're in the field. What do you do? This is really the time for you to just have constant check-ins with your team, to check on all that preparation work. How applicable was it to your actual field experience? You want to check to see if, say, your communication plan is working that you developed before you got there. And treat any prep materials that you have created as living documents that can be edited and modified at any time, because you can always have that sort of idea that you're going to try to prep as much as you can, as well as you can before you go, but you never really know the true nature of what it's going to be like when you're actually there. So that's why it's really important to just keep editing those as you go. And then lastly, again, it's really important to make sure that you save time after you come home to have some debrief meetings, especially while this is all really fresh, and discuss with your team, you know, how did it go? Did everyone have the right gear? Were your group norms appropriate? What's something that you wish you had known before you left? This is especially good to hear from people who've never been to the field site before, who have never participated in that particular field work. That information can be really informative for the next time around. And this is especially helpful too if your field work happens at a particular time of year and then it's always, you know, 6 months or 9 months later until you leave. If you do that prep right after you come back, you'll really thank yourself when you're getting ready to prepare for the next time. So as you probably noticed, I spent most of my time of this talk really talking about what to do before you leave. But again, it's just that reminder that this is a feedback loop, and it might seem like there's so much work to do ahead of time and you're already doing all this other work to prepare, but it's really going to help you out if you take the time and really also include your team and all of your team members in that process. It's really going to help you in the long run. And you also might notice too that a lot of the work that you do to prepare for a particular fieldwork campaign is actually going to be applicable to other fieldwork campaigns. Okay, and with that, I'd like to transition into the second breakout room, where you're going to go back into your breakout rooms that you were in before, and go back to looking at those challenges that you discussed in the beginning. And now is your opportunity to discuss potential solutions, share resources that you may have to help address those challenges or concerns. And if you are struggling with a particular, with finding a solution for a particular challenge, you know, include that as a question and, you know, highlight that. And perhaps, you know, that could be an opportunity for someone to help find that resource for you. So we can start that part now. Okay, so here, actually, I'll stop screen sharing for a second so we can all see each other. So I wanted to take another minute or so to discuss, to hear from any of the breakout rooms. Is there a breakout room that would like to share any solutions that they discussed? And again, yeah, feel free to put them in the chat, or you know, raise your hand and unmute yourself. Seems like there's a lot of action going on in the Jamboards, which is awesome.
We were definitely busy typing and yeah, moving around our little notes.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, we have somebody in the chat.
Oh yes. Yes, so yeah, so Lou says they said that communication was super critical, lots of meetings and planning. And yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, you know, I wouldn't be worried about you know, providing too much information, particularly for field work. I think it's really important to provide as much information as you possibly can, because that can really you know, I think that providing your team with as much information and context so that they're really aware of what's ahead can really make a huge difference in the ability to you know, to be able to react when things don't go according to plan, you know. Oh yeah, and then Nick shares, yeah, complete skin coverage to minimize risk of sun damage and insect plant materials. Yeah, so this is if you're at a particular field site where there's a lot of sun exposure, making sure that people have enough sunscreen or clothes that cover them adequately. That also can really make a huge difference, because you don't want people showing up on day one getting a terrible sunburn and then being miserable for the rest of their time. So yeah, these are really great. And then Nick also adds policies and procedures for diversity, inclusion, bullying, safeguarding, etc. Yeah, this is also super, super important. This is, I think, one of those things that falls under the psychological safety aspect that I mentioned, that, you know, a lot of times it can be easy to focus on you know, physical hazard prevention. That's often what people really think about when they're thinking about field work. It's about, you know, being outside and being exposed to elements and things like that, but really making sure that you consider also aspects like diversity, inclusion, bullying prevention, harassment prevention, things like that. That is really, really, really important as well. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So then I think, let me just see here. I think, yeah, everyone's seeing, okay. So yeah, so I think, yeah, now I basically just wanted to open it up for questions and discussion. So again, yeah, if people want to keep discussing the breakout room stuff, totally open to that as well. I also wanted to just mention that also, if people want to submit questions, there's a couple of different aspects that Martina mentioned in the beginning. You can mention them in the chat. You can also share anything in that Menti page. So if you go to that menti.com and enter that code, you can also put in questions anonymously there as well. And this can be any questions that you have about anything that I mentioned today, or also if you have resources to share too that you'd like to share more broadly. I think this can be a very open discussion now with the time we have left.
I think we do have another comment in the chat.
Yeah, let's see.
So Sandra says, I think it was not mentioned, having a pre-field trip confidential document for each member with their next keen contacts, as well as any health issues or treatments ongoing.
Yeah, yep. That's a really good point as well. Yep. So making sure you have avenues for people to share pertinent medical information without you know, with following the guidelines around privacy, excuse me, is very important as well. Yep, and I think that's a good way to do it. Yeah, and then someone offered, Nick offers having an ICE card kept on your person with that emergency contact information as well, and also medical information is also really good to do as well. We have developed through our work at UNH, we have these cards that have space for people to put their emergency contacts on, as well as local contacts for the field work. And then on the back, it has emergency contact information at UNH, particularly around confidential sources, and then also not confidential sources in terms of you know, incidences of harassment or sexual harassment, things like that. So that's also good to make sure people are aware of in the field, so that they know what resources are available to them if they find themselves in a situation. Yeah. Has anyone else, does anyone else have a like a particular sort of method or thing that they like to do with their teams before before they go, or even during trips? Is there any sort of method that people like to use for check-ins, things like that, that they'd care to share?
I think for me, when I did the majority of my field work, I mean, we were all in really close proximity. So, I mean, I was doing flux measurements, so we had those frames installed in a way where I could kind of check in with each group measuring. Well, first of all, people were always measuring in groups of two so that nobody was by themselves. And then I would just try to go around and check in with everybody every hour or so to make sure they were okay, to make sure things were okay with the equipment and things were going okay for them. But I mean, I think because of the way our field site was set up, that was an easy thing for me to do. And I know that some other people doing flux measurements in our group have used like walkie-talkies or something so that they could talk to each other during measurements and check in.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, someone mentioned having bear safety training made me feel more comfortable with working in bear country. Yeah, that's really great. So also, yeah, so an aspect of your, and this brings up a good point about trainings, is that it's really good to think about what trainings your field team could really benefit from before they leave. And these trainings are going to be unique to the types of field work that you do. Like if you're going to be working in bear country, having your team participate in bear training, as we've just seen, can make a real difference for people. I am right now participating in field work that involves the use of snowmobiles, and I don't have any previous experience with snowmobiles, so I'm the PI on the project has offered to have us take an online safety training around snowmobiles, and that for me has been a comfort. I think for going into that situation, knowing a bit more about how to safely operate snowmobiles, things to consider like that, is nice, and it also, you know, makes me feel less like I have to ask all the right questions, you know, in order to get the information that I need. So having those sort of those set trainings can be really, really nice. Yeah. And then someone also mentioned, so someone in room 2 noted knowing everyone's limits physically and mentally. I love this and wonder if you have suggestions of the best way to do this, especially mental limits, both individually as well as a group exercise. Yeah, so you know, this again kind of calls back to you know, how it's important to not only consider you know, the physical aspects of your field work, but also the, you know, the mental aspects. So you know, how isolating is the field work going to be, and how is that potentially going to impact people, especially if it's a long duration field campaign. And so I think, you know, one of the ways that I think you can address this is to just, you know, during those pre-departure meetings, just try to make space, I think, to have open and frank conversations about, you know, the physical and mental aspects of your field work, and, you know, to the best of your ability, speak to your own experience as well. You know, I think sharing how, you know, your field work has affected you, I think it can be nice for other people to hear, but also recognizing though that you know, especially if you have found that your particular field work has not been, say, for example, that mentally taxing, you also just want to consider that it might, something that is maybe not mentally taxing for you can be mentally tasking, excuse me, for others. So I think providing opportunities for people to share when they're having a difficult time is good, sort of providing space for that. One of the ways that we try to do this in Emerge is we have nightly debrief and planning meetings with the field team. And that is a time to, review, successes and maybe not so successes of the day, and also plan for the next day. And we also hold time during those meetings for people to bring up anything that they want about, how they're doing. This hopefully sort of creates a, culture of openness and communication to, again, just provide people an opportunity to share any struggles that they have. Yeah, and I think again too, also this can harken back to the community agreement. So having stipulations or statements in there about allowing people to have space to decompress on their own, or also calling on team members to kind of check in on their teammates and see how they're doing, and create a space for openness and sharing between team members, I think can be really good. Is there any questions that anyone has? Okay, sorry, we have another thing coming in through the chat. Yeah, risk assessments are useful when done with the purpose rather than ticking the mandatory institutional boxes. Yes, I agree with that. Making it the document that can be put up in any possible situation, if possible, discuss it and involve different people, despite most people thinking that health and safety can be a pain. Yeah, so, right. So, yeah, risk assessments are kind of one of those things that, that I think can be viewed as sort of a box ticking exercise. But if you have it as part of your, pre-departure meetings discussions that you have with your team, it can be a really great way to discuss, to kind of integrate in. You can integrate it into the discussion as a way to, describe the site that you're going to, describe the place that you're going and how it differs from where your home base is. And you can also consider providing people opportunities to make suggestions anonymously. There's several, survey resources out there that you can, you could share the risk assessment with the team ahead of time. You say ahead of your meeting, and say, please review this. If you have any suggestions, please, consider filling out this survey, and they can provide those suggestions anonymously. That can also be nice too, because sometimes for some people, group discussions can be a little intimidating. And so you also want to make sure that people aren't, or, to the best of your ability, make sure that people are not feeling like they can't share concerns because they're in a group of people that they've never met before. So I think it's also important to not only provide those group opportunities for discussion, but also potentially provide alternative opportunities for providing feedback if you think that that's at all a concern for your particular group.
I think one thing that's maybe not been mentioned that I know you also included in the Emerge Safety Handbook, if I remember correctly, is that it might not only be important to talk about risks and challenges like when you're in the field, but especially when you go to an area like northern Sweden that's rather remote and like you're spending all your free time there as well, that there also might be risks and hazards associated with your surroundings when you're off work. Because I know we've had an instance here where we've had international students come in who did not know how to swim and then spent their free time around lakes. And yeah, so that's definitely something I think that's important to consider as well.
Yeah, thanks, Martina, for bringing that up. And that's something that, yes, I didn't mention explicitly during this presentation. You know, when I was talking about you know, site information, it may have sounded like I was just talking about the field site in particular, especially if your field work involves overnight stays. That is like a whole other sector of your field site information. So you can have, you know, you can have a whole section on describing what the actual field site, but then you'll also want to take the same amount of time to describe and discuss what the living situation is like, where you're doing those overnight stays. Yeah, discussing free time, how, you know, how to conduct free time safely. Also things like rooming arrangements, like how are sleeping arrangements going to be made? Do people have the opportunity to you know, have their own room or their own tent, say, for example? Do they need to share sleeping spaces? Do they have an opportunity to choose who they, you know, share a room with or not? And making sure that people are aware of that ahead of time is essential. I feel like sometimes I'm turning into a little bit of a broken record, but I think, yeah, any aspect that you can make people aware of before they go is going to be huge. And yeah, and that certainly goes along with time spent off the clock, especially with overnight stays. You're going to have that time when people are back at say the field station or the campsite. How should they conduct their time there? You know, we have stipulations in our handbook that says, you know, if people are going to be going off, you know, going off on, you know, a hike or something, that they need to tell at least 2 other people before they go, and then they need to tell them where they're going, and then they also need to make sure that they tell them when they return, kind of things like that, just so that we know where people are going. And can kind of, yeah, try to keep track of people. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. I think we're slowly moving towards the end of our session. But yeah, I think one of the takeaways for me today definitely was how important prep work is. Like, I think a lot of the challenges we had, what it came down to for us was if you prepare properly, you might be able to avoid that challenge. I think we had some challenges, like my really long work days where we had like more specific solutions, like maybe doing an overnight stay before your long work day in order to reduce your driving time. But yeah, I would say 80 to 90% of our challenges, it was if you are properly prepared, you might be able to avoid those issues. And I think it was really interesting for me to learn also about a lot of things that I might not have considered for fieldwork, because I've never really done fieldwork in remote locations. So if that's something that comes up for me in the future, I definitely feel much more prepared for it now, thanks to you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. That's great to hear.
Yeah, and I have a couple of slides to share with you before we go out. So I will share my screen again. Sophie, I'll just stop your screen sharing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I thought I had stopped it.
Okay. So we would like to ask you to provide us with some feedback. I think Jane can maybe share that link in the chat box as well. But I think she will also follow up with an email that will contain Sophie's slides in PDF form and also the recording, and will ask for your feedback. So even if you don't remember that link now, I think you'll have that information later on. As I said, there's also a recording of the session and the slides will be provided. So everyone who's registered will receive those for the session they registered for via email. But you can also find more recordings of previous training seminars on the Global Peatlands Initiative's website. And there are more events coming up for this training seminar series, and those can be found on the Eventbrite site for the Global Peatlands Initiative. And you can follow Sophie, Nicole, who was not there today, and me on Twitter. I'm not sure how active we are on there at the moment with all the changes going on at Twitter, but yeah, please do feel free to reach out if there are any questions you have. And mark your calendars for our next session. So it's once again the Peatland Early Career Researchers team organizing the next session on Monday, February the 13th. And yeah, we will have great speakers once again with Julie Loisel, Petra Boynton, and Sabine Jordan. And we will be dealing with how to do better peer review and deal with negative feedback during that session. So hopefully that's also something that a lot of people can learn from. I hope to take a lot away from that session as well. And last but not least, we are looking for new volunteers. So we especially trying to find people to help us with our newsletter and with social media outreach to potentially move away from Twitter to other platforms as well. But also, yeah, to potentially continue organizing such seminar series in the future. So if you're interested in working with us, please do reach out either via Twitter or email, or there's a contact form on our website. And also on our website, that's, I think, my last announcement for today, we did make 2 Peat calendars with wonderful photos that people submitted. So if you're in need of a 2023 calendar and wants to support the Peatland Early Career Researcher community, please go to our website and there's a link to the calendars on there, and all the profits from calendar sales will be used for our Peat Needs micro grant funding schemes. And as Sophie said earlier, like field gear might be an issue for people, and that's something, for example, that we hope to help people with those micro grants. So thank you everybody so much for joining and that lively discussion at the end, and hope to see you again a month from now. Bye everyone.